Hello, and welcome to the Word on the Street's July Book Talk. In conversation this month, our author Sofi Papamarko with a new collection of short stories, Radium Girl, out from Woolsack and Wynne. In the guest interviewer seat, we have author Jessica Westhead. A bit of background on our guests. Sofi Papamarko is a former regular columnist for the Toronto Star, Sun Media newspapers, and Metro Canada. She's also written for the Globe and Mail, Chatelaine, Flair, CBC, Reader's Digest, Salon, Exclaim, and many other publications, both living and dead. Her short stories have appeared in the Quarantine Review, Tattle Creek, Maison Neuve, Room, and the Toronto Star. She lives in Toronto with her partner and their children. Welcome, Sofi.
Thanks, Maya.
And Jessica Westhead is the author of the novel Pulpy and Midge and the short story collections Things Not to Do and Also Sharks. Her latest novel, Worry, was a CBC Book's Best Book of the Year and was longlisted for CBC Canada Reads. And I'll leave it to them to talk more about Radium Girl.
Hi.
Hi, Sofi. This is really fun to see, like you said, more of your face on the screen. Thank you so much, Maya, and thank you to Word on the Street for having us here today. I am so delighted to be here to celebrate Sofi Papamarko's wondrous short story collection, Radium Girl. I enjoyed these stories so much, and I'm looking forward to gabbing about them today. You'll see my eyes darting off to the side where I will be reading my questions. So a short story can accomplish so much in a small package. Descriptions in short stories are thrillingly distilled, and just a few well-chosen words can bring a scene completely alive. In Sofi's fantastic story, Underwater Calisthenics, a young woman considering an abortion remembers back to Sunday school, where she learned that dead, unbaptized babies go to this place called limbo, and recalls this scene. Once, a mouse got into our Sunday school classroom. It ran all over like a little wind-up toy. Miss Alma jumped onto a chair and screamed, "Somebody kill it!" The janitor came and crushed its tiny body under the weight of the Old Testament. I asked Miss Alma if the janitor was going to hell for killing one of God's bright and beautiful creatures. She pretended not to hear me. Hello, Sofi. Congratulations on Radium Girl. I wanted to start by asking how your stories generally announce themselves to you. And once you started a story, how do you keep up your momentum? Do you often start writing stories in a similar way, like with an opening sentence or a line of dialogue that you're excited about? Excuse me, or a specific feeling or an image? Or maybe do you have no pattern at all and you end up taking a different route with every story that you write?
Yes, that second part. Yeah, every story in the collection, I think, came about in a different way. With Margie and Lu, which is the first story, it was just this line that popped into my head. It was like, I have to build a story around that. So we were born the day the Challenger space shuttle exploded. Things have only gone downhill from there. So it's like, what do I do from here? So I want to write a story. Thanks around that. With Underwater Calisthenics, I started with an image of a young teenage girl in a swimming pool watching this like mothers and toddlers and trying to figure out if she wants to be a mother when she's basically a toddler herself. So everything, and often it's character as well. So I think of a character and then what is the situation I can put them in that would cause the most tension for them, make them the most uncomfortable. So all over the map, really.
I love that. How can I make my characters the most uncomfortable? That actually kind of leads into my next question, because I loved that aspects of certain stories in Radium Girl actually often made me quite uncomfortable myself. They sometimes disturbed and unsettled me in a really thought-provoking way. In your story, Tiny Girls, the protagonist reflects on his hobby of collecting photos of little girls, but he swears he would never harm a child in real life. And then he finds himself alone in his mother's house with 2 Girl Scouts. And yet somehow you manage to find humanity in that discomfort with nuance and humor, which I think is a really wonderful and difficult trick to pull off. So I'm curious about what draws you to write about difficult subject matter, and what's your process like for connecting with characters who sometimes do disturbing things?
I think difficult subject matter is the most interesting subject matter. I mean, upbeat, fun stories are great, but I think you get more in terms of character depth and at least my personal interest if we're going dark. So I'm a pretty like happy, optimistic person in life, as are you. We are friends off the record. We're just like, I think we're both pretty happy, sunny people in general in the world. So there's got to be a place to put all that darkness. And for me, it's my fiction. And in terms of that story, Tiny Girl. So yeah, it's a pedophile. He calls himself a non-practicing pedophile. So although he has these attractions, these proclivities, he does not act on it in any way except for gathering child pornography, which is also, a crime, legit. But he said he would never touch a child. And then all of a sudden there are these two beautiful little girls in his house and he's alone and he's just like, doesn't know what to do because I think he's ultimately a good person, ? Because he doesn't want to harm anyone and has a lot of self-loathing. But yeah, that's got to be tough for him. And I think the reason that I like to find the humanity in people is because I like to find the good in people in the world in general, as often as possible, because how else do you muddle through this life? And that particular story was heavily inspired by Lolita, because I just was so fascinated when I read Lolita at how charmed I was by Humbert Humbert, who is like a vile, disgusting person. Yeah. But he's aware of that. He's self-aware. He's also like hyper intelligent, charming, witty. And I was like, how did Nabokov do that? Like, I like the guy and you're almost rooting for him in a horrible, twisted way. But no, you're not actually rooting for him. But that's why Tiny Girls came about, because I was like, I want to do this too. How do I make this guy likable?
That's so interesting. And I like what you said about where do we put the dark, and I'm going to kind of go off script here because that made me want to ask a question. I mean, I have a young child. She's almost 9, and you have, I know, right? And you have a new, very tiny child. I wrote a story in my first short story collection about a woman who kidnaps a toddler. I guess he's younger than a toddler. And people ask me, how did you feel about that story after you became a parent? Because I wrote that before I had my daughter. And, I'm still really happy with the story, but I wonder if I would have felt differently. That story came out of kind of watching parents and being all judgy and being like, you're not watching your child enough, and they just be walking along the street or whatever. And now I'm like, well, they were probably just, browsing in the stores. But I wonder how do you feel about that story in particular? And how does becoming a new parent, I'm in awe of you because you've had a book baby and an actual baby during the pandemic. How does being a new parent kind of influence how you think about these stories and maybe get you thinking about what you want to write next?
That's like a three-pronged question. And I haven't, my baby's 3 months old and I haven't revisited Radium Girl since I've had her because I haven't read a word. I would like to maybe reread my stories at some point, but it's not happening anytime soon. I don't know how I feel. Yeah, I don't know how I would feel about Tiny Girls now. I think I would probably be maybe more uncomfortable because I would project her into that world. Like, what if my child is a girl guide who goes to a horrible predator's house? I wouldn't allow that. I'm going to keep my child ensconced in a bubble.
Of course.
But yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the answer is like I haven't had enough time to meditate on that yet. And in terms of what I want to write in the future, I'm already working on a novel that I started when she was 6 months in utero, and it's really like inspired by her and the dreams I had during my pregnancy, which were super vivid and bonkers.
Oh wow.
Yeah, bonkers. And I know that's a thing with pregnancy, and I know that's also a thing with the pandemic. So having a pandemic pregnancy was just like, whoa, these are the best dreams I've ever had. And so I think a lot of that will be informed by her and by parenthood as well. And what was the third prong? I can't remember the other part.
Oh, just the fact that, yeah, I mean, you basically answered the prongs. But just how, you know, how having a baby at this time, I think I remember talking about when my daughter was younger, talking about how I was interested in writing about, you know, darker things, because even though I think I'm quite an optimist, and you know, I do look on the bright side of things, all of a sudden all these dangers were so much more apparent to me, and, you know, just little innocuous things that you really hadn't considered before. You know, you have to just work hard to keep that at bay, because that can be, you know, it can be a little distracting if you let that worry take over.
Worry.
But, yeah.
Like a great title.
Just plug my book there.
Jessica wrote a great novel called Worry about exactly that.
Yeah. But yeah, I did become kind of more interested in that. But I feel, didn't you tell me that your new novel is kind of a departure from the short stories? I don't want to ask you too much about it. It's still so new, but I felt like you said it was kind of pulpy is the wrong word.
I feel like I hate the term like women's literature, or like, it's not really chick litty, but like it's a lot less dark and more fun and sort of, I mean, Radium Girl,
rompy kind of, yeah.
It's a really fun book. You guys should all pick it up. Look at this fun cover. It's fun. It's less serious, I think, and it's less intense in terms of like emotional stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, I don't know. It's maybe you feel more optimistic naturally when you're becoming a parent, even though I gave birth in like peak pandemic, and I still have to feel optimistic, because how can you not if you have a small child?
Absolutely. Well, I guess speaking of finding optimism as well, the longer that I work at being a writer, the more I realize that there are fertile and fallow periods to this thing. There are ebbs and flows, and sometimes the words just aren't coming, and that's totally okay. And when that happens, I often end up reading a lot. I go for lots of walks. I let my mind wander. And I found that just being gentle on myself, and also writing down early ideas by hand in my notebooks can help to kickstart the creative process again. So what do you do if you're having trouble of thinking of what to write? You said you're not, I mean, right now you're caring for a very young baby, but if you're just sort of in that mode of kind of, what am I going to write next? But you might not have an actual project in mind, but you're still feeling that itch to write something. So do you have any tried and true tips for aspiring writers on how to get the words flowing?
If you can't write your novel, if you don't have the idea for your novel, write a short story. And then all of a sudden, like over years that you don't have a novel idea, you have this whole bunch of stories, and you're like, hey, wait a second, this could be a book. Even just writing a scene, I think, maybe observing, like now that we can re-enter the world, thankfully. I used to like sit in coffee shops like most writers and just like overhear conversations, or like look at people and wonder what they're like, or what their life is like, or just being curious about their lives, and maybe just like ripping off on a tangent, adding them to a scene, maybe fictionalizing something in your life, working through emotions in your life. Writing can be, you don't necessarily have to produce something good or publishable. It's just like therapeutic. And I definitely wrote some crappy stories and scenes and dialogue that never made it into this book and will never see the light of day again. And it's all good practice, and it's all very therapeutic as well.
That's great. An epiphany occurred to me years ago that a notebook for writers is like a sketchbook for artists. It doesn't all have to be, like you said, it doesn't ever have to see the light of day once you've written it down, and it doesn't all have to be gold. It doesn't all have to be publishable. And it's just practice, and you have something that you can also go back to if you're sort of in a period where you're looking for ideas, and you can flip through your notebooks, and sometimes something will be, it'll resonate with you at a different time of your life.
Yeah.
I guess I also wanted to ask you about story order, because that's been on my mind a lot, and I'm working on a new story collection. I put more thought than ever before into the order of the stories. I want that to add like a layer of meaning to the collection. how much, what was your thought process behind ordering the stories in the collection, and how much input did your editor offer on the story order?
I cannot take credit for the story order at all. That was all my editor, Jen Sikfong Lee. I had this order that I thought was the right order, and she's like, no, this is your order. And I was like, wait, what? So in my head, you sort of ease, it's like getting into a swimming pool. You sort of ease your feet in and ease the rest of your body in. You don't want to like shock anyone. Just kind of like start like slowly and then build up and then accelerate. And she's like, no, we're starting up here. Starting with Margie and Lu. I'm like, what? But they're not ready. How could they?
They're not ready.
Backing in from like a dock at the cottage into the icy water. Like how? What? But she's right, I think, because you have to. I mean, if you don't like the first story, you're not going to like the collection. So if you're just like, this is shocking, I can't, then you can walk away. And you haven't put that much time and effort into it. But for everyone who's going to like it, they're grabbed and they just want to keep going and keep going. So I think that the story order, that the way Jen set it up is like, it starts off really high and it goes down and then there's like ebbs and flows. And so it sort of is a more balanced approach than like, because by the time you get to the, maybe people lost interest in the first story. I think they're all solid stories, but maybe if it were a little quieter, people wouldn't be as prone to continue reading.
We'll shout out to amazing editors who help to make our books extra wonderful. And I think that's about it for us. I really loved talking more with you about your book, and I enjoyed it so much. Go out and find this wondrous short story collection, Radium Girl by Sofi Papamarko, at your local independent bookstore. Support your independent bookstores. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Sofi. This was really fun.
Thanks. We love you, Word on the Street.
We love you, Word on the Street.